Okay, heading north on a Thursday. I can feel it getting a little chillier in the mornings these days, because it's well into September. And think I might take this one off the road at the end of the month and put it on sawn. I can't see me doing long trips in November or even October. I'll just use one of the other bikes for short trips. I do a lot of motorway miles through the summer by choice on the bikes if the weather's reasonable. Why wouldn't you? I mean, why would you want to drive a car when you can drive a bike? But then only bikers would understand, I guess. So I was talking to a guy that was interested in motorcycles not so long ago, and we were just sort of chatting, and I said, well, yes, I've still got an interest in bikes even though I'm getting on a bit, and I've always had a bike well, since my early teens, not legally of course, but when we were kids we had an old D1 Bantam that used to race around the fields on. Of course that bike would be worth a fortune now. And we had all sorts of strange machines. BSA winged wheel was one of them. Can't remember if it was 25 or 30 cc's, but it was basically a bicycle with a wheel in, an engine in the wheel. And we got to talking about bikes, and I said, well, are you still riding? And he said yes. And he said, well, what are your interests? And I said, well, I tend to prefer older machines, particularly classics. And then we got onto a conversation about what the hell is a classic. I mean, what is a classic? These days anything's a classic if it's survived 15 years, really, as far as the insurance companies are concerned. And we sort of agreed that well, classic bike insurance is a wonderful thing, but that he wasn't prepared to take a chance with a real classic, whatever that is. And he decided that he wanted something a little bit more reliable, yet with a classic feel. So, you know where this is going. He had an Interceptor. And so we had a bit of a talk about it, and I thought, well, it's very easy to upset people if you criticise their bikes. So I just said, well, yes, I'd had one for 2.5 years, and yes, it did have a classic feel. The chassis was really comfortable, very well set up, but the seat was bloody awful. And he sort of said, well, I don't go far enough for it to be a problem, and in any case he was fairly young by my standards, so I kept quiet against all about all the problems I had, and you know, I was well aware of the electrical problems after I'd had the first failure, which was the neutral connector, just a straightforward electrical connector on the on the connecting up to the battery, and it was the old story which I didn't know about then, because this was not that long after they'd come out. And I cleaned all the grease out of the connector after I'd got the bike home. And it seemed to be okay, so cleaned all the rubbish out of the connector, and then everything seemed to be okay for a bit. And then we started to have problems with those accursed relays. Well, 2.5 years ago, well, nearer 3 now, it wasn't an acknowledged problem. And Hitchcock's at that time, we're talking 3 years, as far as I know, they hadn't got any replacement relays. And most of the relays are the same, so I swapped them over when I had problems. And probably the bike had it just didn't have enough use, probably, and that's what sort of made the electrical parts continue to fail. And then eventually the starter failed, and that was the end of it, really. I should have got rid of it when I first had misgivings, and the bike had to go back to the shop for modifications to the calipers. And at the shop they had an X11, which is the naked version of this Blackbird on which I am sat. And I always liked those, but they weren't very successful. And the Honda Hornet, which was a sort of budget bike at the time, sort of took over and they stopped making the X11. But nevertheless, I've always sort of fancied them, because this is such a lovely engine. It's got twin balancer shafts on it, this engine, and the X11, they took one out to give it a bit of sort of vibratory feel, given that it was a naked bike. And I have to say, I've never ridden one, but always fancied a go, or even to own one. And they had a really nice one in blue, the same colour as my Hornet. And I sort of looked at it, and I thought, yes, I wonder if I should I say goodbye to the Enfield and get an X11 with, you know, far more power and torque. But at the time I thought, well, I've had a nice ride over here, about 45 miles to the dealers, and to be honest, it was a lovely run. The Interceptor does have a nice a nice riding position, and providing you're not going too fast, it's okay, apart from that bloody seat, which is awful. And anyway, I bought one of those Indian seats, an aftermarket device, and it was really nice, actually, well padded, but being Indian, it wasn't very well made, and it took a couple of hours to make the thing fit properly. But after I'd done that, the bike was definitely far more comfortable, and I did use it a couple of times after it had been run in, and they will cruise at an indicated 80, no problem. That equates to about 75, same as this Blackbird it was all a bit fast, the speedometer reading. But at that speed, the wind blast was a little bit of a bore if you were going a fair run, which I do regularly on the motorway. And I put a Puig screen on it, and that was a great improvement. But it didn't really stop the distrust that I had for the thing, and the last straw was when the starter failed, and to get to the starter solenoid you have to strip out all the battery box and various bits and pieces. It's a bit of a pain, and there were one or two connectors under there as well that needed looking at. And I swapped over the relays on the bike. I didn't want to go buying Hitchcock's ones, and it still wouldn't work. But it did work when I put a direct connection onto the starter terminals, so I could start it with an external battery. And I thought, oh, stuff this, I don't really want to take this back to the dealers yet again. And I thought, well, should I just change these bloody relays? And then there was the question of, if you change parts for non-standard parts during the warranty period, if the worst happened and Royal Enfield wanted to be RC, which I don't suppose they would, but nevertheless, if they searched for known non-standard parts, would they then say, hang on a minute, the bike is non-standard, we have a warranty issue here? So, cut a long story short, I just left the bike in the garage. It was early spring, and it was chilly, so I wasn't using it. In actual fact, I tended to use any bike but that one, because I just found it a bit on the boring side. I've got no complaints about the design. I think the Harris frame and the engine is okay, apart from the low power rating, which they designed in for A2 license holders, I believe. Well, any 650 back in the 60s, you know, the best one as far as I ever remember was a 69 Bonneville, and the power output wasn't far short of the Interceptor, but it was free breathing, no cats or anything. So it was more vibratory, but it had a very similar feel to the Interceptor, but it had the advantage of being a classic. And here we come back to what's a classic. Well, it's impossible to say, but if anything is as near a classic as possible, it would be a 69 Bonneville, which of course was my era. And I never actually had a 69 Bonneville, but would have liked one. In '72 I bought a Triumph Trident 750 triple, the original one, and that was okay. Would I call that a classic? I suppose everybody would. It wasn't anywhere near as reliable as the pre-unit Bonneville that I sold to get that one. No, I didn't actually. What happened? I think I just sold the pre-unit bike for peanuts, as you did in those days.